Thank you for coming to today's program. We have a big crowd today. We're excited for the presentation. This is the Eye and Ear Foundation webinar series called Sight and Sound Bites. This bi-weekly webinar series highlights research at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. We're very excited about today's topic, which is hearing aids, everything you need to know. I'm Craig Smith. I'm a Senior Development Associate with the Eye and Ear Foundation. The Eye and Ear Foundation supports research to advance care for vision, hearing, balance, voice, and cancers of the head and neck at the two world-renowned departments of Ophthalmology and Otolaryngology at the University of Pittsburgh. The funds we provide from EEF to support research are only made possible thanks to philanthropic support, including from many of you. So thank you for that. A few housekeeping things to go over before we start today's program. Today's webinar is going to be recorded, and we always add these webinars to our website. So if you'd like to view later or share with other people, you can view this webinar on our website, which is just www.eyeandear.org. You'll notice that the chat function is disabled today. That is normally a function that you can use during Zoom, but we have this disabled. However, you can submit questions using the Q&A function. And after our presentation today, we will leave some time at the end to go over these questions. Any questions that we're not able to answer during today's presentation, we will certainly take note of and follow up with you afterwards. We ask you that you refrain from asking specific personal health questions that may not be relevant to the larger group. But again, if you'd like, you can email those questions to myself. My email is included in the original invitation that you received for today's event. And also, we will be adding any of our participants today to our email list. So in the future, you'll get invitations to other webinars, and you'll get blog entries and other information about the research taking place within our departments. Very excited to be joined today by Dr. Catherine Palmer. Dr. Palmer is a professor of otolaryngology and also a professor in the Department of Communication Science and Disorders here at the University of Pittsburgh. And she is the director of audiology at UPMC. And I will turn it over to her and let her take it away. Dr. Palmer.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be with everybody today, and I'm excited that so many people are interested in this topic. So I don't know if I'll, by the end, have told you everything you need to know, but hopefully a lot of what you need to know. And as Craig said, we'll take questions at the end, and anything we don't get to, we'll follow up with you. Our Eye and Ear Foundation friends always make sure that these webinars are captioned. So if you would like to see text on the screen and you're not seeing it now, just go to the bottom bar and you'll see something that says live transcribe. And if you click on that, it'll give you a place to click to make this visible so you can see the captions if you're not seeing them right now. So I decided to set this up today with frequently asked questions, because we are asked questions often through phone calls and emails and people coming into the clinic who have lots of questions about hearing aids. And pursuing hearing healthcare, unfortunately, continues to be very complicated and hard to navigate. And so unfortunately for some people, they give up and they don't navigate it. We certainly don't want that to happen. So I'm hoping by going through these questions, I can answer some of what was on your mind. And again, you can ask more at the end of the presentation. So really common question we get is, what is the best hearing aid? And another way we hear that sometimes is someone comes in and says, my friend loves his hearing aids. Should I get the same ones? Or they may just say, I want to get the same ones because I have a friend who loves the hearing aids he has. So I want to take you through how we approach fitting hearing aids. And something I say often is there actually is no one best solution, but there is a best solution for you. So when someone says, what's the best hearing aid, that question is very device focused. And so one of the first things we want to do today is separate out the device, the gadget or the technology, versus the service and the care that go into selecting the correct device and then setting that device, actually programming it to do what it needs to do for that individual. And unfortunately, those two, people don't usually think about both pieces because we just tend to talk about hearing aids. And so by using that term, obviously people think about the device, they think about a hearing aid. So a lot of people feel pretty confident that there must be some best hearing aid that some company makes. The reality is there are 6 companies that produce hearing aids at this point, 6 major companies. They all produce really good technology. They all produce excellent technology. Some of them are a little better in certain niche areas than others. And so as an audiologist, we know that. We understand that about the different manufacturers and products. So somewhere like UPMC, if you come to audiology, we work with all 6 manufacturers, so we can match the right technology for the person. So given that thought that there isn't a best device, all very good, or the majority anyway, are very good, but there is a best solution, let's try to go through that so I can have you understand a sense of what goes into fitting a hearing aid. So what the audiologist is doing when they sit down with you and take about an hour, so they're assessing hearing, we need to know how you hear. And the rest of the time, we're really talking about your lifestyle. And we're asking you a lot of questions that may seem very odd at the time. So, we want to know what you do for work. If you're working, if you're retired, what are you doing on weekdays? We tend to say, what are you doing on the weekend? What do you do for hobbies or leisure? We ask people things like, do you ride a bike? And if you ride a bike, do you wear a helmet? And sometimes when we ask someone if they ride a bike, they think, why in the world is my audiologist asking me that? But we need to get a sense of that because, of course, wearing a bike helmet impacts the interaction with hearing aids on your ears, depending on how that helmet fits. Or if you're someone who rock climbs and hangs upside down, it's pretty important that we know that in terms of retention of any device that you might be using. Or if you're out in the rain all the time, that impacts the solution we might suggest. If you're someone who usually wears AirPods or some kind of Bluetooth receiver in your ear, we need to know that, because once you're wearing hearing aids, we don't want you taking them out and switching to some other AirPods. So we need to know all the things you do in terms of communication and activities to really put together the best solution for you. So if you've been to an appointment and wondered why people are interviewing you so extensively about your lifestyle, that's why. So then we're armed with your hearing data, and we're armed with all this information about your lifestyle, your needs, what's not going well right now in terms of communication, what your expectations are, what are your 1 or 2 key issues that are really giving you a hard time. So we're sure, we can try to solve those issues. Part of that hearing assessment as well lets us figure out where the problem is coming from in your hearing system. And that's important in case it's a medical issue that should be treated by a physician. So in all the UPMC practices, we practice with ENTs or otolaryngologists or otologists, so they go by different names, but they're ear, nose, and throat physicians or people specifically focusing on the ear, and audiologists. So the reason for that is to provide total hearing health care. So with the diagnostics that the audiologist does, we can see what part of the system the problem's coming from. And if it's really something that can be medically treated, we want to move you over to a physician surgeon who can talk through, what might that solution be. For adults, about 95% of hearing loss is not medically treatable. It's permanent hearing loss. Sometimes because of noise, because of aging in general, all those kinds of things add up together. And then that means the solution is going to be what I'm talking about now in terms of well-fit hearing aids. So now we know a lot about you. So then the customization goes to customizing the physical fit. And this is one of the most important parts actually of a hearing aid fitting that's often a little bit ignored. And we don't want to ignore this because it has to be comfortable in terms of the part that's sitting in your ear, whatever that is, because something has to be in your ear to deliver the sound. It needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be correct in terms of in relationship to your hearing loss. And so that's something that audiologists will figure out as they work with you. This is just a picture of us making an ear mold impression. So we put material in your ear to get the shape of your ear. And this slide just reminds you that all ears are really quite different. So we want this customization so it's comfortable, but that customization also has to do with the acoustics that end up in your ear and what you're hearing. And from there, so we've customized, we know a lot about you, we've customized the physical fit, and now we customize what we call the acoustic fit, the actual sound that you're going to receive. So on the left-hand screen, that's a picture of a hearing test results. And some of you may have had a hearing test. So that goes on the x-axis from low pitches to high pitches. So like a foghorn in the low pitches, high pitches like a bird. And then from top to bottom is how loud sounds are. And there we're making X and O's to represent your right and left ear. And we're mapping how loud we have to make sound for you to hear it. So this is a basic hearing test. This lets us know, again, where the problem's coming from, how much hearing loss the person has, all that information. So we need this to set the hearing aid, but we have to take these data and we have to transform them to be useful in fitting the hearing aid by accounting for the size of your ear canal. And so you probably haven't thought about this, but everybody's ear canal is different. There isn't an average per se. And so there's a measurement we do using the same earphone that we measured your hearing with. So now you can see in that picture, there's that earphone in the ear, but that little tube you're seeing, that's a microphone. So we're putting that microphone down near your eardrum. That lets us measure the output of this earphone. And we use this in fitting hearing aids too. But in this stage, it's letting us account for how big your ear canal is. And you can imagine if you have a smaller ear canal, it's going to build up more sound when a hearing aid is in that ear canal than if you had a large ear canal. So we need to know that, or we might fit you incorrectly. We might make things too loud or too soft by accident if we didn't account for this. And you can imagine with our pediatric patients, this is really important. It's important with everybody, but with our pediatrics, they have tiny ear canals that actually build up a lot of extra sound. So we have to account for this, or we could actually damage their hearing. So in accounting for this, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, again, you still have those pitches on the x-axis, and the y-axis has now been flipped. So on the bottom is very quiet and on the top is very loud. But all this is showing you is we're taking that first hearing loss measurement from the left side, we're converting it now, accounting for the size of this person's ear canal. And mapping that onto this graph. So that's just a first step that we do. So what's our goal in the hearing aid fitting? Well, our goal is to take the whole world of sound, and that's represented by these blue arrows. So again, on the bottom is really quiet sound. On the top of this graph is really loud sound, and those pitches across the bottom. So there are lots of different pitches of sound in the world, and we have this big range of sound. So if you have normal hearing, you're hearing this whole range, and therefore you can understand things and you can participate. So then the red line on this graph shows somebody's hearing loss. So they have better hearing in those low pitches, and then you can see the graph goes up in the high pitches where they have more hearing loss, which is pretty common of age-related hearing losses. So now that's the range this person can hear in. They can hear from where those red marks are. That's the threshold of hearing that we've measured in the hearing test. And then those asterisks show where sound would be uncomfortable or harmful if it were over that level. So you can see this whole world of sound has to now be squished into the space this person can actually hear. And this is really what the audiologist brings to the table, is the tuning to make this happen. So we need to take soft sounds and amplify them quite a bit to get up to this level. Moderate sounds don't need quite as much amplification, and loud sounds need very little amplification. So we have to program the hearing aid to do things differently depending on the input level. And then you can see if you go side to side by frequency, we have to do things differently by frequency for most people. This person in the low pitches hears a bigger range. In the high pitches, they hear a tiny range. So we have to package a lot of different sound levels into that tiny range in the high pitches. So we do that by putting that microphone that I showed you earlier into the ear and tuning the hearing aid. So here you see the red line, that's the person's hearing loss. The dark green line is the output being measured from an average sound with no amplification. And those little plus signs that are green are the goal of the hearing aid fitting. So without a hearing aid, you can see on the right-hand side, the green line is far below that red line, which means the person cannot hear those sounds. And that's exactly why someone comes in to get a hearing aid, because they are not hearing those higher pitched sounds, which give clarity to speech, like S's and T's and things like that. So what we're doing is we're looking at a person who there's a signal going in their ear, but only part of it's being represented to their brain because of their hearing loss. They're not hearing these higher pitches. We're putting this microphone in the person's ear with the hearing aid, and we're tuning the hearing aid so they can now hear those sounds. So this last picture is showing you a result of someone with a hearing aid where we've now tuned it to bring those sounds where they belong for the person, so the person can actually perceive those high-pitched sounds. And so the next piece of customization, so all this is customizing for an individual, has to do with helping them adapt to the sound. So if you think of aging hearing loss especially, it's gradual, it happens over time. For a long time, people don't even realize they have hearing loss, but the brain is hearing through a filter. Your hearing loss is a filter, your brain's listening through that, and your brain thinks that's normal. That is normal for you. And so if we bring hearing back through the process I just described, I'm kind of representing this with those lighter blue marks in the brain showing that sounds come back, but the brain is not used to that sound. And so there's about a 2 or 3 week adaptation period to get used to hearing aids. So what you're going to want to do is wear them full time, which means the whole time you're awake, but not swimming or bathing. They don't want to get wet because they're electronics. And then over time, that representation will make sense to your brain, and things that were bothering you the day you got the hearing aids, things sounding too loud, too sharp, your own voice sounding different, that settles down over 3 weeks if you're wearing them full time. If you don't wear them full time, then the brain is trying to hear through your hearing loss part-time and through the amplification part-time, and it's not good at that. And you'll be one of the people who say, oh, my hearing aids are too loud, things are too noisy, because you really never fully adapt, and the brain keeps paying attention to sound it doesn't need to because it hasn't settled in over time. So that, I promise, is my longest answer to a frequently asked question, but I think that helps set us up for what's happening when you go to the audiologist. So another question we get is, hearing loss really that big a deal? Do I really need to do something? And we would say yes. And there's lots of data now to support that answer of yes. So we know people with untreated hearing loss have increased cognitive decline. There's a relationship between that. There's an increased risk of falling for people with untreated hearing loss. They're more vulnerable to depression. There's increased odds of social isolation and decreased social participation, which also links to depression. And there's increased risk of medical adverse events, actually, not necessarily understanding everything that was communicated like in a healthcare appointment, and increased hospitalization and readmission. So none of these are positive. These are all negative. And the good news is, for people with treated hearing loss, the data suggests that every one of these things improves. So that's very positive. So all these things are less of a problem once someone is a full-time hearing aid user, using that really consistently. And another piece of data that came out in 2020 from Lancet Commission, and some of you may follow this, so they put out these really large reports with lots of data, looking again at cognition. This is specifically dementia. Is 40% of dementia is potentially modifiable. And what that means is there's something you can do to make that less burdensome. So that doesn't mean the person might never have cognitive decline, but it could be delayed, it could be less severe, is what they're saying. And what was interesting to us in this report is that hearing impairment is the single largest modifiable risk factor. So that is really quite compelling, given that, of course, we're all concerned about our cognition and want that part of our well-being to be as stable, certainly as long as possible. So when we think about this gradual age-related hearing loss, I think I've pretty much said this, but we have a signal we're getting less of to our brain. Same signals coming in, but less is coming to our brain because it's not being passed through our auditory system. And we really fully adapt in the sense that becomes what we think is normal. Even though we're missing things, We may not know what we're missing. That's usually typical. But there's this gradual change. And we have to think about, like I said, a gradual getting used to sound when we get amplification. All right, another really common question. Why are hearing aids so expensive? Well, again, I think one of the mistakes we make is when we talk to patients is we say, oh, hearing aids are going to be, and maybe it's $3,600 for 2 hearing aids, but that's not really what we mean. Typically, you'll see what we call bundled prices. So if, let's say it is $3,600 for 2, what we're really saying is that $3,600, those are the 2 devices. And then that's all of the service and expertise that goes with fitting them. So that's the original time spent to figure out, again, all about the person and what they need and figuring out the right technology for them. It's all the fitting expertise of what I just described. It's the follow-up care. And typically that's a 2-year warranty on the product, the device, for any kind of repair, damage, loss. But it's also all the services one might need over time. And once someone has hearing aids, there are services over time. They need to be cleaned, they need to be taken care of, and things can happen to them depending on your lifestyle. So that's part of understanding the expense of what's wrapped into that price. It's not just the device. And then the piece of it is there is the devices themselves are like tiny computers, and the research and development that goes into that is part of what's driving the device part of the cost. Now, one could argue that they should be less expensive. I don't disagree with that. And we have not seen the prices come down, which most technology does, if you think about computers and things you've gotten over the years. But that's the answer in terms of the pricing is really the devices and all the services that are needed for the devices to work properly and for you to adjust. How long should I expect a hearing aid to last? Well, you should expect about 5 years is what the manufacturers estimate. That doesn't mean a hearing aid can't be repaired and continue to be used after 5 years. We have lots of patients who have the same set of hearing aids for well over 5 years. And we have others who replace them sooner. That could be because they've been damaged. It could be because there's some new technology that they want to try, and then they'll keep the current hearing aids as backups, which can be nice to have, because once you use hearing aids, you really don't want to be without them. So 5 years is a good rule of thumb for this. Something we are really careful about is we don't recommend people get new hearing aids just for the sake of getting new hearing aids. So with the kinds of measurements I described, we can always measure the hearing aids someone has and give them good advice as to whether they're still doing what they need to do, or if they're not, we can connect them to the computer and retune them. That's the beauty of hearing aids. If your hearing changes, you don't need to buy new hearing aids in this day and age. They can be retuned to yours, or if they aren't meeting your needs anymore, we can certainly let people know that as well. Does it matter where I go to get my hearing aids? Well, I think it does, and I'm certainly biased in this answer, but I can at least give you some facts here. And in terms of education, there's a difference in where you go. And so one reason people get confused in hearing healthcare is there are different people who can provide hearing aids. So an audiologist has 4 years of education post their undergraduate degree. So they have a clinical doctorate in audiology. It used to be a master's degree. Now it's a clinical doctorate. And that education has to do with the diagnosis of hearing problems, and then the treatment and understanding all the different treatment avenues that one might want to explore, not just hearing aids, although that's what we're talking about today. So that's that education and the expertise that goes along with that to do this customization that I described specific to hearing aids. There's an access to technology depending on where you go. So I think that's important, that where you go, the audiologist is able to access all the different technology to make sure they're getting the right thing for you at that time. So there are retail outlets that are really specific to one manufacturer that limit that ability. This is a relationship you'll have for the rest of your life. Once you need hearing aids, you don't stop needing them. the typical hearing loss that needs a hearing aid doesn't get better, unfortunately. So this is not just the product, but the service. So you want to go somewhere you're comfortable. That's really very important in terms of that relationship. And then I think part of it is depending on how you look at this. I obviously think of this as hearing healthcare. That's how we approach that as audiologists in the medical center versus a retail purchase. So if it's a retail purchase, you're really very device focused. And I'm hoping today I can convince you that the device, in a sense, is the least of your concerns. They're all good devices. It's really about how they're tuned. And we certainly do, unfortunately, see people come in wearing very good, expensive devices that simply haven't been fit correctly. Now, the good news is we can do that then for them. They don't need to buy new hearing aids, but better to start out on the right foot on that if possible. Should I wait until Medicare covers hearing aids to get them? This has been a question we've been asked a lot in the last few months. So we were kind of waiting for January to come, looking at the budget reconciliation bill, which is part of that Build Back Better with President Biden and his team. And some of you may have been following this. So first of all, it's really unclear what, if any of this will pass the Senate. It has passed the House, as you probably know. Now, what we do know, if any of the language is retained related to hearing, what they're looking to try to cover is moderately severe to profound hearing loss. So that is really very severe hearing loss. That's not the majority of people the majority of people have mild to moderate hearing loss, that aging kind of hearing loss I described. So of course, part of Medicare's responsibility is fiscal, and looking at what they thought they could or couldn't cover, they decided they would really need to target on this more severe hearing loss. So I think depending on your hearing, and this is certainly if you come get a hearing test, we can give you some advice. Nothing's covered currently. Hearing aids are actually statutorily excluded from Medicare. So Medicare covers nothing related to hearings. They cover hearing tests, but not hearing aids. So this would be a change, and it has to be legislative to make this change. But if there's a change, it really built for more severe hearing loss. So maybe not great to wait for that, unless you truly have severe hearing loss, and even then you probably don't want to wait because you really need help now. Okay, I need help with the devices I already own. Can I come in and get help without buying new devices? Absolutely. If you come to UPMC, you can, and we're happy to do that. We do that all the time. But if you're looking elsewhere, you need to ask this question. You need to make sure the practice welcomes this kind of work using devices you've purchased elsewhere, and hopefully they do. Once you come in, we have to know if the devices are locked or not. And what that means is there are certain places you might purchase a hearing aid where it's locked to anybody else. So you have to go back to that place. We'll know that when we hook it to our computer, so we can tell you if it's locked or not. And even if it is locked and we can't change it, we can at least make measurements and give you advice about whether it's meeting your needs or not. Okay, something we've been hearing recently. I'm thinking about getting over-the-counter hearing aids. How will I know which to get? So if you're following the FDA, they have put out proposed rules related to over-the-counter hearing aids. So in 2017, the legislature passed a law that directed the FDA to create this category of devices. So this was Senator Warren and Senator Grassley of Iowa. Teamed up. They don't team up on a lot of things, so that was impressive. And they teamed up and passed this bill, and the FDA just put out the proposed rules. So that's a little bit late, but that finally happened. And then everybody was able to comment until mid-January, and those final rules will come out sometime later this year. So then those products can exist. Currently, they don't actually exist. So you're all probably thinking, well, then what am I seeing in advertisements? Some of what you're seeing are called personal sound amplification products, which are they are different from OTCs and are not meant to be specifically targeted to people with hearing loss. They're meant to just enhance hearing, like when you're bird watching or something like that. Some you're seeing actual hearing aids being sold direct to consumers because that is legal in some states. But true over-the-counter hearing aids won't come out until the FDA has this final rule. So how do you know what to get? Well, currently nobody can know because they don't exist. Once they exist, I think it is worth your time to go into audiology to get a hearing test. And so I kind of show you a hearing test on the right-hand side of the screen. That is covered, hearing tests are covered by insurance, Medicare, and the commercial payers. So I think that's a worthwhile visit. So with this hearing test, we can tell you if you probably are a good match for an over-the-counter hearing aid, and we can advise you as to which one. And they are targeting mild to moderate hearing loss, over-the-counter hearing aids. So really the mildest losses where you just need kind of situational help. We wouldn't expect you to be a full-time user. And I show this particular hearing test where you see the results are different for the 2 ears. The blue and red lines are different. This is important, for instance, because you may think you have mild loss, and in terms of level, that's true of this diagram, but the fact that the ears are different make us worried that there is a medical issue because ears are usually the same. So this would be a good example where it would not be terrific for you to have gone directly and just gotten an over-the-counter device. Better to have had the test, because really your next stop is to visit one of our otologists to think out what's going on in the system that maybe could be corrected. So first step, get a hearing test so you can get good advice, you know how you actually hear. And then by the end of the year, some of these products will be available. And if you are a candidate, then that may be something you want to pursue. All right, with my new glasses, I could see perfectly right away. Why don't my new hearing aids work like that? I answer this question at least once a week, and it's a really good question. So I'm going to give you a little detail to try to explain why. So when we test hearing, we look at sensitivity. That's this graph I keep showing you. So here it is one more time, pitches across the top, quiet, going down to loud, measuring where people can just hear sound. That's a sensitivity measure. And in a sense, resolving sensitivity is easy if we have the right measurements. So we can bring sound back to a level where it can be heard. And then there's the issue of clarity. So clarity is once it can be heard, are you perceiving it correctly? So that's the issue we're thinking about here. So when we think about eyeglasses, the typical vision problem is what we would call conductive, which means the signal, the visual signal is not getting to the sensory system of vision. And once we put on glasses, we correct that part, and a good signal goes to the sensory system's intact, and you see. And that's why when you put on glasses, it's like, voila, I can see. Unless you have macular degeneration, which is a sensory problem. So for people with macular degeneration, they do wear glasses. That does help, but that signal is going to a damaged sensory system. So they still have problems in their vision. So the typical aging hearing loss is similar to macular degeneration. It's a sensory problem. So in this graph, what I'm showing you is as if I could cut the head in half. You're looking at the ear canal with sound going in the ear canal up to the eardrum, and then it makes the bones in the middle ear, which is an air-filled space, move. That outer and middle part are the conductive part of the system. And so when we put an earphone in the ear, we are measuring those and plotting the O's and X's there. We're measuring everything through the system, if you can hear those sounds. And so the conductive part is that outer and middle ear. And if there's a problem there, that's medically treatable. And when it's treated, it's like when you put your glasses on, immediately you're fine because we got rid of the problem that was blocking the signal. And now the signal goes into a good sensory system. If you've ever had a hearing test, we also put a little piece behind your ear that vibrates. That goes directly into the inner ear, the sensory part of your hearing. And we get to measure how well that part of the system's doing. So as I said, noise-induced age-related hearing loss has created damage to the sensory system. So why this matters is when we fit a hearing aid perfectly, we are delivering the correct sound, but it is going through a damaged sensory system. And that system adds distortion to the signal. So the signal is not perfect when it gets to the brain. And so you'll see advertisements that make it seem like there are magical hearing aids that can solve that clarity issue. And that simply isn't true, because the clarity issue is coming from your sensory system, and the signal has to come from outside in the outer ear. So we're having to go through the damaged sensory system, and there is no magic at this point that can solve that problem. Now, I don't want to minimize the importance of using hearing aids, because if you don't have the sound coming in, you can't possibly interpret it. So you want well-fit hearing aids, but you have to have a realistic expectation that that did not fix your hearing. And your family has to understand that too, because often they'll think, well, now you have hearing aids, everything should be fine. And that's not the case. It's better, but it's not perfect. All right. Why did I need a physician to order my hearing test? We do get asked that, and I know that's one more step. Most physicians will order this without you actually going in and seeing them, because they understand that you're wanting your hearing checked, but that's a Medicare rule. So hearing tests are not reimbursed unless they are ordered by a physician. So that's why you're being asked for that. So it's a script or an order, not a referral. You don't need a referral, but an order or script. And most other commercial healthcare provider, health insurance providers follow the Medicare rules. All right. The other one we hear is, why do I have to see a physician first in order to get hearing aids, since that's what the audiologist does? Well, the good news is you no longer do. The FDA just changed that when they came out with the new rules for over-the-counter hearing aids. They changed this rule as well. So there is no longer a requirement for you to see a physician first. You can come right to the audiologist. And again, the expertise of the audiologist in terms of testing will let us know if you actually do need a physician. And of course, we'll send you there if that's the treatment you actually need. Okay, another one we hear a lot, Costco has second-rate hearing aids, right? No, Costco has the exact same hearing aids that I have access to. They're rebranded and renamed, but they're the same technology. Some of their devices are locked to make it so you go back to Costco for care, and some aren't. And so we certainly have a number of people who've purchased devices at Costco and need customized care. So they come to us. And so when we hook them to the computer, we can figure out if they're locked or not. And if they're not locked, then we can reset them correctly. The devices are significantly lower in cost because Costco buys in bulk, just like they buy their croissants and their muffins and their grapes and everything else. So they certainly do have lower cost in terms of what the device is going to cost. Okay, so if Costco has the same technology, which I just said they did, why shouldn't I go there and save money? Well, it's really a decision, obviously, on your part. A few things to understand if you decide to pursue your hearing aids there is Costco has an excellent program of promotion from within, which is great for their employees, but it does mean they're moving people who were in other parts of Costco into being the people who are fitting hearing aids. And certainly those people get training in terms of hearing aid dispensing. But typically those are not audiologists. They could hire an outside audiologist. Typically that's not what we see in that model that they have. They really don't customize the physical fit. I will say when they come to a barrier, they do sometimes send people over to us, since we can do that. After the 2-year warranty, the patients we've interacted with have expressed that Costco does not repair aids, but rather has you purchase new aids. And that may be different from different Costco locations, although they're pretty similar. That's not actually what you want to do, because as I said, hearing aids really should last 5 years, and they certainly can be repaired. And I did mention some of the aids are locked, which means you won't be able to go elsewhere. And I would say, just in general, you want to be able to go other places, including if you move or if you travel. So just something to think about when you're thinking about where you want to get hearing health care, if that's the right place for you. All right. Is there any reason I can't be a part-time hearing aid user? Well, I've already kind of harped on this with you, but I'll say again, it's a gradual decline of hearing. Your brain gets used to hearing through that filter, and we have to retrain your brain to the sound that's ideal for it. And that's why we do a hearing aid fitting all with measurements. We really don't ask people the day of the fitting how things sound, because we know they're going to tell us they're too loud and too sharp. And then we counsel people on using the hearing aids for 3 weeks, full-time use, meaning all the time you're awake, except for when you're getting wet. You want to be using this. And it's kind of a neat process if you embrace it, because you notice compared to day 1, day 5, the car is not bothering you anymore. But the first day you left the clinic, you thought your car was breaking down. There was so much noise. So it's this gradual change over time, but it only happens with full-time use. If you have friends that are part-time users, they're probably continue to complain that they don't hear well in noise and things are too noisy. That's pretty common. All right, I can hear sounds, I just can't understand. Is there a hearing aid that makes sound clearer? I actually already talked about this when we talked about the sensory problems. So a well-fit hearing aid is going to make sounds as clear as possible. And then depending on your sensory system, you may have more or less distortion. And one of the tests we do in the hearing test gives us a pretty good estimate, so we can give you some realistic expectations about how much distortion we're going to expect internal to your sensory system. I still don't hear as well as I would like to with my hearing aids and noise. Should I buy new ones? So the big answer here is no. I would suggest you go in, make sure you have an audiologist who's putting a microphone in your ear, making measurements, make sure they're set correctly. Make sure you're using 2 hearing aids if you have hearing loss in both ears. That's how we hear a noise, by having input on both sides. Make sure you're using them full time. And if it's still true, then we may have to add on some help. And that could be with a remote microphone, which means there's a microphone you can put really close to the thing you want to hear. That really helps with noise if you're comfortable putting a microphone near what you want to hear, or with captioning. And so now with cell phones, either an iPhone or an Android, you can have real-time automated captioning and see text with anything you're hearing, which also can be a big help. I hear that if I get an over-the-counter hearing aid, I'll be able to adjust it myself. I won't need an audiologist. So the bit of research that's been done so far indicates that quite a lot of people that get things directly still really need some assistance, and that's fine. And you're welcome to come into the clinic and we will help you with that. And this is just a graph, some data we collected showing an automated fitting versus when we fit through our measurements. These are all items that were important to people, and their satisfaction went up in every category once the devices were individually fit, which is not surprising. My spouse says I have hearing loss, but I would know if I had hearing loss, right? I'm sure this has to ring true for some of you on the call today, and not necessarily. So data collected here at Pitt by Dr. Mormer and colleagues found that only about 40% of older adults actually correctly self-identified that they had impactful hearing loss. And again, it's the gradual nature. Sometimes we just don't realize it's happening. Well, I have to stop using my AirPods to hear my cell phone music and podcasts once I have hearing aids. No, it's so exciting. The newest hearing aids have connectivity to your phone. So any sound coming out of your phone wirelessly is going to your hearing aids. So your hearing aids behave as hearing aids, and they behave as basically a Bluetooth receiver like an AirPod. So that's kind of cool. How will I manage the hearing aids if my hands shake? We have rechargeable hearing aids now. We've had them for a few years. That's been a huge solution for many patients, that you can just put them in a recharger each night and then put them in the morning and not deal with those tiny batteries. So just a slide of questions I think you should ask when you're deciding what healthcare to pursue. Are you seeing an audiologist? I would suggest you should, based on training and expertise. It's not unreasonable to ask where you're going if people are compensated through commission. That changes the relationship in terms of recommending products. So I think that's something you might want to pay attention to. Certainly at UPMC, that is not how people are compensated. Is the person able to order from any of the manufacturers to make sure to get the right technology for you? What's the warranty? You'd like, 1 to 2 year warranty, depending on the hearing aids. Do they use really a probe microphone? That's really essential, because if they're not measuring the output of the hearing aid, then you might as well have ordered these over the counter, because they're not being fit anymore particularly. What's the return period to allow for adjustment? That's important. The state requires a 30-day return period. And many practices give you more. We at a minimum have 45 days, because we have to make sure once you're adjusted that these are making a difference in the situations where you wanted them to make a difference. And last slide, hearing loss is a whole family issue. If you have a hearing loss, you're doing your part when you get hearing aids. But the rest of the family has to think about that, again, because of the sensory nature of the hearing loss. The hearing aids didn't fix the hearing loss. It's making it better, but you need to decrease noise when you're communicating. People need to look at you, not talk to you from other rooms, and things like that. So let me stop there, and I'll see if we have any questions. Craig and I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. That was certainly a very instructive presentation. We do have a lot of questions. We have a large audience today, so a lot of questions, but please keep sending them in through the Q&A session, and we'll try to get to as many as we can until the end of the hour. And like I said, we'll follow up with any questions that we're not able to get to. So the first question that we have here is, can you discuss hearing aid solutions for those who suffer hearing loss in just one ear?
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's interesting, I think we tend to minimize as a society, oh, you have one good ear, you're fine. And you're not, because how we hear a noise, how we know where things are coming from, depends on two ears. So if you have a problem in one ear, it really throws you off, and you're using much more effort. So if the ear is aidable, and that we would know by measurements, then we would put a hearing aid on that ear and get that balanced out. If that ear is not aidable, which can happen, it's got so much damage and we can't put an aid in it, there are a variety of solutions. And so one thing we can do is put what looks like a hearing aid on that ear that doesn't work and actually send the signal over to the good ear. That does not help in noise and localizing, but it helps a lot if a person is standing on that side of you, or sitting if you're in meetings. So that can be helpful. That's called a bicross or a cross hearing aid. There's an implantable piece that can then go in with a microphone and do basically the same thing, but it's sending the sound internally over to the other ear. And that requires a surgery. The first one does not. And just in the last year, the FDA has approved the use of cochlear implants in one ear, that if it's so damaged that it can't work at all, that we can actually bypass that damage and send sound right to the nerve of hearing on that side to bring that hearing back. So there are several ways to go about that. And the first step is definitely to sit down with the audiologist and talk through that. And then if it's a surgical solution, obviously we would connect you with our otologists.
Okay. What are the best ways to minimize movement of the device? And this might be more about the original fitting than an actual practice to minimize the movement.
To minimize what?
To minimize movement of the hearing aid.
Oh, of the device. Okay, so that's all about that physical fit. Absolutely. So if you're having trouble that it's not staying in, it's moving while you're doing things, then we need to take another look at the physical fit. And we definitely, there are a whole bunch of different things we can do for retention and making sure that's not moving, and especially depending on what activities you're involved in. So again, that's another visit or a new visit. And we can definitely take a look at that, which in that it goes back to, and whoever asked that understands, no matter how awesome the hearing aids are, if it's not sitting right and fitting right, it doesn't matter how great the hearing aids are. Yeah.
Is there a specific type or brand of hearing aid that's preferable for patients with excess cerumen production? Great
question. So not brand, that all 6 make good hearing aids. So if you have lots of earwax, it's going to get into the hearing aid one, it's going to block the hearing aid. So the question is, we want a way for you to self-manage that. And so the earwax doesn't actually get in and damage the hearing aid. So what's important there, you can either have the plastic ear mold that goes to a behind the ear, and then you can clean out the plastic ear mold because you're not damaging anything. There's no technology in it. Or you can have the part that goes in your ear, have the loudspeaker in it, And then it has what's called a wax guard. And so that's a piece that protects the hearing aid from the wax, but it means you'll need to change the wax guard pretty frequently. So we have a couple different ways to handle that. Now, if you produce lots of earwax, once you're a hearing aid user, we also recommend you routinely have your ears cleaned because that will help you manage it. So you'll want to see one of our ENTs, or wherever you live, your ENT. Some people every 6 months, some 4 months. We have some people that go every 3 months just to keep ahead of that.
I've heard a device that looks like a pen that you can point in the direction of sound you want to hear. For instance, you might be in a noisy restaurant and point it to the other side of the table. I haven't been able to find such a device. Does this ring a bell for you?
Yeah, that's a remote microphone. We talked about that just a little bit. And the one that looks like a pen is just one particular brand. That happens to be one of the companies looks like a pen versus looks like something that clips on. So absolutely that exists. What you want to keep in mind is the ads kind of make it sound like you can just hold it. It really has to be close to the thing you want to hear. So if you think about a restaurant, let's say you're going to dinner with one other person, you're going to want to take that mic and clip it onto the person's lapel, because the way it works is if it's close to the sound, it's going to pick up the sound and not so much all the noise in the restaurant. So those remote microphones are really good for one-on-one when there's one person, like if you go to a lecture and there's just the lecturer, or out to dinner with one person. Once you're in a group, they're not as useful unless people were literally passing the microphone around, which is probably problematic.
What are your thoughts on over-the-counter hearing aids that are advertised on TV that use Bluetooth to remotely tune and wireless charge?
Yeah, so I mean, interesting. Technically, they're not over-the-counter hearing aids yet because that category doesn't exist, but clearly they're, direct to consumer and you're seeing them. There's no way to give you a blanket statement because right now there's no regulation. So there's no way to know if they're good technology, if they have good sound quality. We can't know that yet. So again, I would recommend a hearing test so you at least know the level you're hearing at. But the concept that if you have mild loss, you could buy something and then with an app on your phone, do some tuning is reasonable. The problem is what we know is because hearing loss is so gradual and your brain adjusts to it, that typically people don't tune the devices particularly well for themselves, because if you really tune it to where it needs to be, you really don't like it in the beginning. And that's part of how we counsel you to just tolerate it. But if you're tuning it yourself, it's unlikely you'll kind of do that to yourself. And you don't know how not good it should sound. So it's a little tough to do, but not unreasonable if you have mild loss and you want to try something like that. And again, if you come in, we can always measure it and let you know if you got it tuned right, and we can help you retune it if you didn't.
So I think this is an important question, although we're a little biased because I'd say Dr. Palmer is our favorite, but how do I vet an audiologist? There are hundreds of facilities and personnel.
Yeah, so I think that the second to last slide, I think one, make sure it actually is an audiologist. And that is my bias in terms of training and expertise. I think if you're comfortable, it is worth asking the salary structure. I think for me, commission is really problematic. I think you want to make sure you're going somewhere where at the end of the month, that person's going to get the same salary regardless of what decision you made, including if you decided not to do anything at this point, just to take pressure off of kind of the need to sell things. So I think that's important. I absolutely ask if they use really or probe microphone measures, because if they're not, it means they're not measuring anything. And if they're not measuring anything, then you might as well have gotten this over the internet.
How does 24/7 tinnitus affect an audiology test, and will a hearing aid improve hearing given this condition?
Yeah, so we use a different signal for people who have tinnitus, so we're sure we're measuring their hearing and not the fact that they're hearing their tinnitus. So we definitely have a way to manage that to get a good hearing test. The data suggests the majority of people who use hearing aids have a lessening of the perception of their tinnitus. And the reason for that is tinnitus is often associated with damage to the hearing system. And so there's damage, so sound isn't going to the nerve of hearing, and the nerve is just generating sound that you're hearing internally. So with a hearing aid, remember, we're picking up the whole world of sound. So those low-level sounds that you haven't heard for quite a while now are coming into the system. So even when you're sitting in a quiet room, it's not actually quiet. There's always sound. There's, Your room makes noise, your clothes make noise. So what's good about that is those nerves are busy processing those low level sounds, even sounds you're not really noticing. And so people often do find relief. I don't want to imply that's curing your tinnitus. It's not, but it is relief from the perception. Not every single person experiences that, but the majority certainly do.
Okay. With age-related hearing loss, how do you know when it's to the point where you should get hearing aids if the advice from the hearing test is that they are optional?
Optional. Well, that's interesting. I guess it's always optional. I always say to my patients, you're adults, so everything's optional, right? You get to make the decision. So I would highly recommend as you hit 55, 60 to get a baseline hearing test, just like you do with your vision. We don't think twice. Of course, we get an eye test. So, that's a good age to just get a baseline. And then if you don't have hearing loss, then come back in 3 to 5 years, unless you notice something sooner. That optional is kind of a funny word. I would say, if you have measured hearing loss, you are a hearing aid candidate. The only thing that's making it optional is your choice. So I'm not sure how to answer that part, but I think the first step is to get a baseline so you have advice on where you are with your hearing.
This next question is kind of for me. Can this program be viewed later? Yes, as I said in the introduction, we do record all of these webinars and we add them to our website. It usually takes a few days to get them edited and added. So I would check for next week to have this program on our website, but that's just www.eyeandear.org, and you can find all of our webinars on there. So you talked about the Costco hearing aids and how, really over time they aren't significantly lower, but that initial price out of the gate, how much of a difference is it?
Well, that depends on who you're comparing it to. So at UPMC, we work really hard to keep our prices as low as we can. We haven't changed our prices in well over a decade in order to try to be really sensitive to that. So they are lower than us, not terribly lower, but they are lower. Another practice who might have higher prices, they'd be a lot lower. So it depends on who you're comparing it to, but they are lower. I don't want to say they're not. They are, because they're buying, phenomenal bulk. They do only use the style that goes behind your ear. So there's some constraints on buying in that kind of quantity, right? So there are only certain manufacturers they work with. There are only certain styles they use. But what they use is perfectly good technology. And I really do want to go on the record saying that, because I think people have a tendency to say something's wrong with their hearing aids, and it's not. They're the hearing aids anybody else gets to.
I listen to audiobooks to fall asleep without earphones. Can I not use hearing aids overnight without causing hearing problems?
You can use your hearing aids so long as they're comfortable. And that would be something you definitely want to tell the audiologist, that you plan to maybe use them more often. You probably won't want to get the rechargeables if you're using them, more than 21 hours in a day, because the charge will run out. So you could use regular batteries. It's good to give air to your ears every now and then. So for you, we'd think about in the physical fit to make sure we're leaving air flowing in and out of your ears, so that's safe. I definitely have patients, even for safety reasons, they feel more comfortable, keeping their hearing aids in at night. Some keep only one in, and then they switch ears each night. I have some younger patients who have young kids, and they want to keep, as they say, keep their ears in at night to make sure they're hearing their kids. So yeah, you can do that. You're not going to hurt anything. You're going to use more batteries, but we could talk out that kind of solution.
Okay. What criteria should one use in deciding whether to have a hearing aid inside the canal or the style that's behind the ear?
So it depends on your hearing loss. It depends on your lifestyle. It depends on the size of your ear canal. It depends also just on what you want in terms of preference and how things look. If you want the rechargeability right now, you have to go behind the ear. If you want connectivity, there are some of the larger in the ear styles that have connectivity and the over the ear. So there's not a right or wrong answer to that. It's a personal decision that you'll make along with the audiologist, and they can, for you specifically, talk about some of those pros and cons. For some people, they want this to be invisible. So the tiny one that goes way down in your ear can be invisible. And you want to be honest with the audiology. If being invisible is critical to you, say that, because that's fine. And then we can go down that path.
Can you name the 6 manufacturers of hearing aids?
I can. Let's hope I don't forget anyone, and you don't tell them if I do. The holding group is Sonova, and they have Phonak and Unitron. We have Oticon, their holding group is Williams DeMott. So they all have these kind of parent companies. We have Widex and we have Signia. They have merged, so they're called WS Audiology now, but they still maintain two product lines. Starkey is the only US manufacturer. They're out in Minnesota. Who have I forgotten? Resound, sorry, GN Resound is another one. So I said Starkey, Oticon, Phonak, Unitron, Widex, Signia, Resound. I think I got them all. So it looks like 7, but that's because Unitron and Phonak are kind of together.
And we do just have one more time for one more question, and anybody that we didn't get to your questions, we will follow up with you. But I think this is a good one to finish on. What's the best way to get in contact with your clinic if they'd like to use your services?
Oh, to call us. So you can call us at 412-647-2030. That takes you into our Oakland location, and you may need to leave a message, but we'll call you back. You don't need to come to Oakland. You can tell us where you live, and we can certainly find a satellite closer to you if you're not, in the city. We're all one group. We all do the things the same way. So you're welcome to call us again, 412-647-2030. That's our main number. And I do see patients. I'm happy to see you. But again, we have a fantastic group of audiologists.
Well, thank you very much for all the information. It was a lot to process, but I think it was very valuable to everybody that tuned in today. And again, this will be online next week for anybody to view. And if you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's just craig@eyeandear.org, and we can pass those questions along to Dr. Palmer to address as well. And please join us again in 2 weeks. We'll have another presentation, and we hope to see you at those as well. So thank you again, Dr. Palmer, and we hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, Craig. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.